Hello, Recapped Mystery here. Today, I'm going to explain a crime, drama, action film, Death Wish. Watch out and take care. Several radio stations in Chicago are discussing the city's escalating crime rate. Things are getting worse than ever, and people are losing faith in the system. A police car is heading towards the hospital, sirens blaring. One of the officers was shot and seriously injured. He is rushed into surgery, where an emergency team is already waiting, but his heart stops beating, and the surgeon, Paul, declares him dead. He informs the other officer that he is not to blame for the death. Paul is having breakfast with his wife Lucy and grumbling about how slow his watch is. They are talking when they hear a loud, joyful scream from upstairs. Jordan, their daughter, comes down and announces that she has been admitted to college in New York City, and they are overjoyed for her. They discuss Jordan's move to college at Jordan's soccer game, but they are stopped by one of the fathers, who is taking the game far too seriously. Paul kindly requests that he stop talking. He becomes enraged, but thankfully the exchange does not extend beyond words. Following the game, the family dines at a restaurant with Paul's brother, Frank, on pizza. They raise glasses of wine in celebration of Lucy's impending PhD completion. They discuss the prior battle, and Frank informs Jordan that Paul used to be renowned for getting feisty when he was younger. Paul agrees to lend Frank some money after supper. They are waiting for their car, but the valet photos the address on the family car's sat-nav after learning they will be gone that night. Paul and Lucy are getting ready to go out for Paul's birthday celebration. They kiss while they finish getting ready, and Lucy gives Paul a watch for his birthday. Paul receives a call from the hospital and is required to report to work. Lucy and Jordan are unhappy that they must cancel Paul's birthday dinner, but they agree to reschedule it. When Lucy and Jordan return home from their evening outing, they notice a suspicious van parked around the block. They start creating a cake for Paul, and Lucy begs Jordan to go upstairs and retrieve her iPad from her bedroom. Jordan is on the phone with her buddy Sophie while getting the iPad. Outside the kitchen window, there stands a menacing black figure. Lucy gets a strange feeling and notices an open window in the kitchen. When she attempts to close it, she notices muddy footprints on the floor. When she realizes that someone is in the house, she calls for Jordan to come downstairs, but a robber dressed in black is hiding in the bathroom and captures Jordan as she begins to descend. The three burglars enter the kitchen and force Lucy to turn off her phone. The group's commander assures them that no one will be harmed if they cooperate, and Lucy is told to open the safe while Jordan is kept at gunpoint in the kitchen. Lucy successfully opens the safe after numerous attempts, and the robber forces her to take all of their belongings out and place them in a bag. Jordan is being harassed by the thief downstairs. When the second robber emerges from the garage with a rope, they argue, and Jordan sees an opportunity to cut the guy's face, but the other person disarms her and throws her to the ground. Lucy returns with the third robber and, upon noticing the disturbance, grabs a pot of hot water and throws it in the face of the uncovered man. She tells Jordan to flee, but the robber's commander has had enough and discharges his rifle twice. Over the intercom, Paul, who is in surgery, learns about two approaching female patients. When he arrives, he is horrified to learn that his daughter is in intensive care and that his wife has died. The goods stolen from their home are listed by Paul to the investigators, Kevin Raines and Leonore Jackson. Frank yells at the cops for not treating the recent crimes in the area seriously enough, but Paul begs him to calm down. The investigators try to reassure Paul that whoever is guilty will be apprehended. Jordan is awake but in a coma, as Paul stands at her bedside. Ben, Lucy's father, talks during her funeral, wondering how this senseless murder could be part of God's plan. He praises Paul for bringing Lucy's body home and inquires about the police inquiry. Paul informs him that 3 repairmen in a white vehicle were spotted by neighbors. Ben abruptly comes to a halt in the middle of the road and examines something on the ground. He gets back into the car, and when they arrive at his land, there are 2 poachers with rifles who race to their car. Ben rushes out and begins firing, but they manage to flee. Lucy's father believes that you can't rely on the police because they only arrive after a crime has occurred. He claims that sometimes men must take issues into their own hands and kills the injured deer, putting it out of its agony. Sometime later, Paul is driving and on the phone with Detective Rains, who informs him that they have no suspicions as of yet. He yells at a homeless man who is trying to clean his car window and is generally angry with the police's lack of progress on the case. As Paul arrives into his daughter's hospital room, he notices Sophie, Jordan's friend, reading an economics book. She says that this way she won't fall behind, and Paul appreciates her presence. Later, he goes to counseling and expresses his inability to sleep in their bed, so he sleeps on the couch. He recalls his terrible youth spent alone on trains to evade his father. He does it now merely to ponder. Everything reminds him of the men who came to take his wife, and he expresses guilt for failing to protect his family. He is assured by the therapist that mending is a process that will take time. Paul travels to see Detective Rains in person after receiving no information on the case for several days. Rains is questioned about the DNA samples, which did not match anyone in the database. Paul notes all of the open cases that Rains is now working on at his office. Only a fraction of them have been resolved. Rains promises him that one of the 3 burglars will be apprehended for something sooner or later, unconnected, and sell off the rest for his own liberty. Rains suggests that Paul consider providing a reward or hiring a private detective, says that providing money would just result in a slew of false leads and that hiring a private investigator, it is illegal to become involved in an ongoing murder case. All he can do is believe. How did their faith work out? Paul is out wandering at night in town when he spots 2 men harassing the young woman. He begs them to leave her alone, but they instead beat him up. He returns home and watches an advertisement for a local guns dealership. He goes to the gun shop the next day, and the shop assistant shows him all of the numerous guns they have. He inquires about the documentation, and she informs him that he is not required to do so. They will assist him with his application, and he will only need to complete a gun safety class, which no one has ever failed. Paul says he'll consider it. Later, Paul is attending to another gunshot victim in the hospital when a gun falls out of the patient's pocket. He kicks it under the operation table before grabbing it. He will watch firearms tutorials and practice shooting over the next few days. Paul is called to the ICU one day and discovers Jordan has suffered a seizure. Her condition is deteriorating, and it appears that she will not live. He grows outraged because the criminals are still out there while his daughter is bound to a hospital bed. That night, he grabs the revolver and begins wandering through a tough section of Chicago. He notices 2 individuals attempting to steal a woman's automobile. He summons them, but they immediately begin shooting. He shoots the driver and they crash as they try to flee. The second person gets out of the car and begins firing aimlessly, but Paul outruns him and kills him. A woman in the window had recorded the entire affair. Paul flees the scene, tosses his hoodie, and boards a train home. He goes to bed after bandaging his damaged arm. Detectives Rains and Jackson interview the woman Paul helped and the woman who filmed the incident. Because Paul's face was obscured in the footage, all they know is that it was a white man in a hoodie. Rains views the footage and finds Paul injured his hand as a result of improper gun handling. They advise the woman to keep the footage private. I uploaded that several hours ago. When Paul sees the video of himself in the carjacking firefight the next morning, he is branded the Grim Reaper by the media. He listens to a radio broadcast while driving to work on whether he is a hero or not. A small boy is shot by a local criminal and dealer known as the Ice Cream Man. In the hospital, Paul examines the boy's paperwork and takes down his address. Following that, Paul dons a hoodie and goes to confront the Ice Cream Man. He shoots and dips him, and the villagers steal all of his ice cream. When the detectives arrive, the witness confirms that he saw a white male wearing a hoodie. Rains witnesses some children reenacting the events and deduces that it was most likely the Grim Reaper due to his left-handedness. Their boss is furious about a vigilante going about shooting criminals, is concerned about others doing the same, and wants to know how far they've gotten. They explain that they know he's left-handed and lacks basic weapon skills thus far. Congratulations on narrowing it down to about 1 million suspects. Paul attends another treatment appointment, and the therapist tells him that he looks much better and that he should keep doing whatever he's doing. Paul chuckles and promises to do so. Paul is operating on another gunshot victim when he realizes it's the valet. He also notices his old wristwatch. When the valet dies on the operating table, Paul walks to the ambulance and snatches his phone. He unlocks it with the valet's finger and retrieves his watch. He searches through his phone for a picture of their address. He keeps digging and comes across a picture of a booze store that is actually a front for selling stolen goods. So he goes to investigate. He heads to the booze store after picking up another hoodie from the hospital's laundry. He fabricates a tale about being sent by the valet, but the owner recognizes the hospital label on his hoodie and sends a text to another crook, Fish, urging him to come over. He then lunges for a handgun, but Paul grabs it and asks him to show him his wares. The owner leads Paul to a safe, where he discovers all of the items stolen from his home. Fish appears and attempts to shoot Paul, but instead kills the owner. Paul shoots Fish through the bar with the cameras and asks who killed Lucy. Fish informs him it was a mechanic called Joe, and his phone has his address. Fish throws Paul to the ground and stands up, aiming his rifle, but a bowling ball falls on his head and he dies. Paul hurriedly grabs the tapes and walks away, but his ring falls to the ground. Raines and Jackson pay Paul a visit at the hospital the following day. They show him a photograph of Fish, as well as the ring, which Paul says is his. They tell him that now that they know one of the burglars, it's only a matter of time before the case is solved. Later, Paul pays a visit to Joe. Joe wakes up tied under the car after he is knocked out with a wrench. Paul cuts a cut through the body's strongest nerve and gives him brake fluid. Joe does not like this, so he tells him everything he knows. Knox is the real name of his wife's killer. Paul thanks Joe for his help and then sits him down. The investigators stop by the batting cage and speak with Frank because they suspect he knows something about the Grim Reaper. Paul is in the hospital with Jordan when he receives a phone call from Knox. He mocks Paul by saying he wants to tell him his wife's final words and requests that they meet at a club in 30 minutes. After no one answers the door, Frank goes to Paul's house and enters himself in. He realizes he is the Grim Reaper as he visits the basement where Paul has been hiding ammunition. Paul arrives at the club and texts Knox to let him know he's there. Knox instructs him to meet him in the restroom. Paul dials his cell phone, and when he opens the stall door, there is only a phone. Knox appears from behind and begins to shoot. Paul blasts off the lights, crawls out, and mixes in with the crowd when he realizes he is cornered. When the detectives receive information about the club shooting, they travel to the hospital, where one of the victims claims to have seen the shooter. They pay him a visit, and it turns out to be Knox. The detectives arrive at Paul's office, but he is not present. Paul returns home, where he is confronted by Frank. Paul claims that he had no choice but to do it because no one else would. The investigators interrupt their talk. Frank opens the door and informs them that Paul is not present. They know he is, but they can't arrest him until they have proof. Jordan is awake, and Paul receives a call from the hospital. He gets there and has to break the news to his daughter that her mother has died. The next morning, they prepare to return home, but Knox joins them as they enter the lift. He strikes up a conversation with Jordan, and when they depart, Knox says he'll see them around. Paul makes a pit stop at a weapons store. Jordan gets ready for bed after supper, but Paul advises her to go beneath the stairs and phone 911 because he saw someone outside. Knox and two of his goons break in, but Paul rapidly neutralizes both of them. He goes down to investigate the noise in the basement, but Knox shoots him in the shoulder and orders him to sit down. Jordan shouts as she exits the stairs, distracting Knox. Paul presses a button on his table and dispatches Knox. When the cops arrive, Paul informs Raines that he received all of his injuries tonight, including the nearly healed cut in his hand. Raines asks a few more questions, and Paul says he's done being a vigilante. Raines is pleased with this and lets him off the hook. Paul later drops Jordan off to college in New York City, where her buddy Sophie is already there. As he walks back to his car, Paul notices a man stealing a bag from a bellhop's cart. He yells at him and brandishes a finger gun at him. Please subscribe to assist the channel, turn on notification and leave a like. Thank you for taking the time to watch. See you again soon.